Her body hit the cobblestones face first. No hands out to catch herself. No sound before the fall. Just a girl, thin as a stripped branch, dropping in front of the iron gates of the Blackmore Palace like someone had cut her strings. The two guards on duty didn't move. They'd seen rogues collapse at the gates before. Happened every few months. Some starving wolf who'd wandered too close to royal territory and run out of road. Standard protocol was simple. Drag them to the tree line. Leave them. Let the forest deal with it. But this one was different. And the reason she was different was the thing strapped to her chest. A bundle. Moving. Making small, thin sounds that the wind almost swallowed. A baby. Guard 1 looked at Guard 2. Guard 2 looked at the bundle. The baby's cry cut through the morning air. Weak. Barely there. The cry of something that had been crying for a long time and was running out of strength to continue. Get the physician, Guard 1 said. Protocol says we don't. I said get the physician. Now. That decision, made by a gate guard named Thomas who earned 40 silver a month and had a daughter the same age as the baby, set off a chain of events that would bring the Blackmore Kingdom to its knees. Not through war. Not through magic. Through something far more dangerous. The truth. Now get this. What happened inside those palace walls over the next 3 weeks is something the court tried to bury. The king's advisors spent considerable effort making sure the story never left the inner chambers. But stories like this one don't stay buried. They claw their way out. And this one clawed harder than most. Stay with me. The girl's name was Wren. She was 19 years old. She weighed approximately 87 pounds, which was about 40 pounds less than a woman her height should weigh. Her clothes were rags held together by habit more than thread. Her feet were bare, bloody, wrapped in strips torn from what might have once been a blanket. The soles were so damaged that the physician who examined her later said she'd been walking barefoot on rough terrain for a minimum of 2 weeks, probably longer. The baby was a girl, maybe 4 months old, tiny, underweight, but alive, alert, and watching the world with dark eyes that tracked movement with a focus that seemed wrong for an infant that young. Too aware, too steady. The physician noticed it but didn't say anything. Some observations were better kept to yourself in Blackmore Palace. Wren was carried to the servants' infirmary. Not the royal medical wing, the servants' wing, because she was nobody, a rogue Omega who'd collapsed at the gates. She got a cot, a blanket, and the physician's assistant, a woman named Henna who had been stitching up kitchen burns and setting broken fingers for 20 years and didn't have time for drama. Henna checked Wren's vitals. Pulse weak but steady. Dehydrated. Malnourished. Several infected cuts on her feet and lower legs. A bruise on her left temple, yellowing, maybe a week old. And something else. Something Henna noticed when she pulled back the rags to check for broken ribs. Scars. Dozens of them. Thin, parallel, deliberate. Across her back, her shoulders, her upper arms. These weren't battle wounds. These weren't accidents. These were the marks of systematic punishment. Whip marks. Administered with precision over a long period of time. Some were fresh. Some were years old. Layers of suffering written on a body like chapters in a book nobody wanted to read. Henna looked at the scars for a long time. Then she covered them. She fed Wren broth through a cloth because the girl couldn't swallow properly. She cleaned and wrapped the baby and found a wet nurse from the kitchen staff who was still lactating after her own child's birth. And she did something that she probably shouldn't have done. She sent a message to the king. Not because she was supposed to. A rogue Omega collapsing at the gates didn't warrant royal attention. But Henna had been in the palace long enough to know that the baby's scent was wrong. Not wrong like sick. Wrong like powerful. The baby smelled like alpha blood. Strong alpha blood. Concentrated in a way that Henna had only smelled once before. On the king himself. Alpha King Caspian Voss didn't visit the servants' infirmary. He summoned Henna to the throne room. She stood before him at 3 p.m. that afternoon, still smelling of antiseptic and broth, and told him what she'd found. Caspian was 31 years old. He'd been king for 6 years, since his father died in a border war that Caspian had ended in 4 months by doing something his father never could. He negotiated, not from weakness, from a position so strong that the opposing Alpha had no choice but to accept terms or face annihilation. Caspian was not the kind of king who solved problems with his fists. He was the kind who solved them with his mind and kept his fists for the problems that couldn't be solved any other way. He was also alone. His mate, a woman named Elise from the Silver Ridge Pack, had died in childbirth 2 years ago. The baby, a boy, had died with her. Caspian had grieved privately and rebuilt publicly, the way kings do. But the court knew the truth. The king slept alone in a wing built for 2. He ate alone at a table set for 1. And every full moon ceremony, when the pack gathered and the bonded pairs stood together under the moonlight, Caspian stood apart, watching, present but separate. A king without a queen in a kingdom that measured power by the bonds between mates. "Describe the scent," Caspian said. He was sitting in a wooden chair, not the throne. He used the throne for formal occasions. For real conversations, he used the chair. "Alpha blood, your majesty," Henna said. "Concentrated, undiluted. The child smells like a pure blood air." "From which line?" Henna hesitated. This was where it got dangerous. "I cannot say with certainty, your majesty, but the concentration is familiar." Caspian's eyes sharpened. He didn't need her to say it. Familiar meant it smelled like his bloodline. The Voss line, the oldest Alpha line in the Northern Territories. "And the mother?" Caspian asked. "An Omega, 19, maybe 20, severely malnourished. Extensive scarring on her back and shoulders. Whip marks, old and new." Caspian's jaw tightened. Omegas were the most vulnerable members of any pack. Protected by law, protected by tradition, protected by every code of honor that the Alpha system was built on. An Omega with whip scars was evidence of something that Caspian's legal code punished with death. "She's awake. In and out, your majesty. She's been asking for the baby. Bring them both to the East Wing. My private physician will examine them." Henna blinked. The East Wing was the royal family's quarters. Nobody went there without direct invitation. Certainly not a starving rogue Omega from the servants' infirmary. "Your majesty, the court will manage." Henna nodded and left. She knew better than to argue with that tone. Caspian sat in his wooden chair after she left. He looked at the empty throne beside him. Elisa's throne. Nobody had sat in it for 2 years. He thought about a baby that smelled like his bloodline. About an Omega with whip scars. About a woman who had walked barefoot across rough terrain for 2 weeks with a baby strapped to her chest, heading toward a palace whose king she'd never met. Either she was running toward something, or she was running from something. Caspian needed to know which. Chapter 2, The East Wing. Ren woke up in a bed that was softer than anything she'd ever touched. For 3 full seconds, she didn't know where she was. The ceiling was white plaster, not wooden beams. The sheets were clean linen, not straw. The air smelled of lavender and beeswax, not smoke and damp earth. Then the panic hit. She sat up so fast her vision went black. Her hands grabbed at her chest where the baby had been. Empty. The bundle was gone. The straps were gone. Her daughter was gone. Where is she? The scream tore out of Ren's throat, raw and animal. She threw herself out of the bed, hit the floor on hands and knees, and crawled toward the door. Her body wasn't ready for this. Her muscles had nothing left. Her feet screamed with pain. She didn't care. She crawled. The door opened before she reached it. A woman in a physician's uniform stepped in, followed by another woman carrying something. A bundle. A baby. Making soft, content sounds. Federal clean. Alive. Ren collapsed on the floor, her arms reaching up. The woman lowered the baby into her arms. Ren pressed her daughter against her chest and made a sound that wasn't crying and wasn't laughing. It was the sound a person makes when the thing they were most afraid of losing is returned to them, and the relief is so enormous it doesn't fit inside a human body. "She's fine," the physician said gently. "Fed, bathed, healthy. She's a strong one." Ren didn't respond. She was rocking the baby, her forehead pressed against her daughter's head, breathing in her scent, confirming with every sense she had that this was real. From the doorway, a voice. "What's her name?" Ren's head snapped up. A man stood in the entrance to the room. Tall, dark-haired, dressed simply, no crown, no formal wear, just a dark shirt and trousers. But the way he stood, the way the air in the room shifted when he entered, the way every person present instinctively lowered their eyes. This was the Alpha King. Ren knew it the way every Omega knows. The scent, the aura, the pressure that settles on your shoulders when a true Alpha enters a space. Not threatening but undeniable, the gravity of someone whose very biology commands deference. She pulled her daughter closer. Instinct. Protect the baby. Always protect the baby. "What's her name?" Caspian repeated. His voice was quiet, patient. He hadn't moved from the doorway. "Mira," Ren whispered. "Her name is Mira. And yours?" "Ren." Caspian nodded. He didn't enter the room, didn't approach, didn't crowd her. He stayed at the threshold, giving her the one thing that nobody had given her in a long time. Space. "Ren, you're safe here. You and Mira. Nobody is going to take her from you. Nobody is going to hurt either of you. Do you understand?" Ren stared at him. She'd heard words like that before. From other alphas. From other men who stood in doorways and promised safety and delivered the opposite. "I understand the words," Ren said. "I don't trust them. Believe me, I've heard a lot of things people say to kings." That was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to Caspian Voss in 6 years on the throne. And instead of anger, something shifted in his face. Something like respect. "Fair enough," Caspian said. "Trust is earned. I haven't earned it yet." He turned to the physician. "Whatever she needs. Food, medicine, clothing, and a crib for the baby. Not from storage. A new one." Then he left. No questions about where she came from. No demands for information. No interrogation. He just left and let her hold her daughter in a room that smelled like lavender and had clean sheets. Ren sat on the bed, Mira against her chest, and tried to understand what was happening. In her experience, alphas took. They didn't give. They didn't stand in doorways and say trust is earned. They didn't order new cribs for rogue babies. Something was wrong with this king. Wrong in a way she couldn't identify. Wrong like kind. And kindness, in Ren's experience, was always the most dangerous trap. Chapter 3. The Physician's Report. 3 days passed. Ren ate, slept, healed. Not fully, her feet would take weeks, the malnutrition would take longer. But she could stand now, could walk short distances, could hold Mira without her arms trembling. The East Wing was quiet. A maid brought food 3 times a day. The physician checked on her every morning. Henna visited in the evenings, bringing extra blankets and an endless supply of opinions that nobody asked for but everyone received. "You should eat more," Henna said on the 3rd evening, watching Ren pick at a plate of roasted chicken. "You're feeding too. That baby needs calories and she's getting them from you." "I'm eating." "You're rearranging food on a plate. That's not eating. That's decorating." Ren almost smiled. Almost. She hadn't smiled in a long time and the muscles had forgotten how. Mira was asleep in the new crib. Handmade. It had arrived the morning after Caspian's visit, carried by 2 carpenters who smelled like sawdust and looked nervous about being in the East Wing. The crib was beautiful, simple but solid, built to last. Ren had run her fingers along the smooth wood and thought about the Alpha King who had ordered it. And she had felt something she didn't want to feel. Gratitude, because gratitude meant debt. And debt meant dependence. And dependence meant someone else had power over you. And Ren had promised herself, crawling through the forest with Mira strapped to her chest, bleeding from her feet, starving, half dead, that nobody would ever have power over her again. On the fourth morning, Caspian returned. He knocked first, waited for her to say, "Come in," before he opened the door. Another small thing that felt enormous. Men in Ren's past didn't knock. He carried a chair from the hallway and set it near the window, a respectful distance from the bed where Ren sat nursing Mira. "I need to ask you some questions," Caspian said. "You can refuse to answer any of them. You can refuse to answer all of them. You won't be punished either way." Ren looked at him. "Ask. Where did you come from?" "The Ashfall territory, eastern border. A settlement called Greymire." Caspian's expression didn't change, but his scent did. A slight sharpening. Greymire was a name he knew. Ashfall was a name everyone knew. The Ashfall pack was ruled by Alpha Declan Hargrave, a man whose reputation crossed borders like a disease. "Hargrave's territory," Caspian said. "Yes. The scars on your back. Were they from him? From his enforcers? On his orders?" Caspian's hands were resting on his knees. His fingers tightened slightly. That was the only visible reaction. "Why?" Ren looked down at Mira, who had finished nursing and was dozing against her chest. She touched the baby's dark hair. So soft, so impossibly soft for a world this hard. "Because I tried to leave. 3 times. The first time they caught me at the river crossing. 15 lashes. The second time, they caught me in the forest south of Greymire. 25 lashes. The third time," she paused. "The third time, they caught me and brought me to Hargrave personally." "What happened?" "He told me I was his property, that Omegas don't leave, that my purpose was to serve the pack and bear children, and that every time I tried to run, the punishment would double." Ren's voice was flat, mechanical, the voice of someone describing events that had happened to a body they no longer fully inhabited. "Then he assigned me to the breeding program." Caspian went very still. Breeding program was a term that had been outlawed in the Northern Territories for 40 years. It referred to the practice of forcing Omegas to mate with selected alphas for the purpose of producing children with specific bloodline traits. It was slavery dressed in biological language. It was the worst thing one pack could do to another pack's most vulnerable members. "Mira," Caspian said carefully. "Is she?" "Mira is mine," Ren said sharply. Her arms tightened around the baby. "She is mine. I don't care who contributed the biology. She is mine. I carried her. I birthed her alone in a storage room. I kept her alive for 4 months while they tried to take her from me. She is mine. Now here's where I need to tell you something. Caspian Voss was not a man who showed emotion in front of others. He'd been trained since childhood to maintain control, to project strength, to never let anyone see what was happening beneath the surface. 6 years on the throne had reinforced every one of those habits until they were load-bearing walls. Remove one and the whole structure might collapse. But sitting in that chair, listening to a 19-year-old girl describe a breeding program in a voice that sounded like it had been emptied of everything except facts, Caspian felt those walls crack. Not collapse. Crack. Just enough to let something through. Rage. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold kind. The kind that doesn't burn out. The kind that builds pressure until it finds an outlet, and when it does, the outlet is usually catastrophic for whoever caused it. "Nobody is going to take Mira from you," Caspian said. His voice was steady. His scent was not. It carried the metallic edge of an alpha on the verge of losing control. "Not Hargrave. Not his enforcers. Not anyone in this palace. You have my word." "I told you," Ren said. "I don't trust words." "Then watch what I do." He stood. He walked to the door. He stopped. "One more question. The baby's scent. My physician tells me she carries alpha blood. Concentrated. Pure blood." Ren's face went blank. a mask dropping into place. Ren knew that scent was dangerous. She'd been hiding it for 4 months, masking Myra's natural scent with herbal compounds she'd stolen from the Greymeyer healer stores. But the compounds had run out 3 days before she reached Blackmoor. And now the baby's real scent was filling the East Wing. "Whose bloodline is she carrying?" Caspian asked. Ren looked at him. Her jaw was tight. Her eyes were calculating, making a decision. The biggest decision she'd made since the night she cut through the fence at Greymeyer and ran into the dark with Mira against her chest. "Yours," Ren said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Caspian didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe as far as Ren could tell. "The breeding program," Ren continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Hargrave acquired bloodline samples from multiple alpha houses. Stolen, traded, bought from corrupt physicians. Your line was the most valued, the most powerful. He used them to breed children he could raise as weapons. Mira wasn't supposed to survive. The breeding protocols are brutal. Most children don't make it past the first month. Mira did. And when Hargrave realized she was viable, he planned to take her from me and raise her as his own." She looked down at her daughter. Mira had opened her eyes, those dark, too aware eyes that tracked everything. "So I ran. For the 4th time. And this time they didn't catch me. If you've been with me this far, hit that subscribe button. Because what this king did next changed everything. Not just for Ren and Mira, for the entire Northern Territories." Chapter 4: The King's Move. Caspian walked out of the East Wing and went directly to the war room. He didn't stop at his quarters, didn't eat, didn't change clothes. He walked into a room full of maps and strategic documents and 12 advisors who had been waiting for him to discuss a trade dispute with the Western Borderlands. The trade dispute would wait. "Summon the council," Caspian said. "Full session. 1 hour." His chief advisor, a man named Aldrich who had served 3 kings and survived all of them, read Caspian's face and cleared the room without asking a single question. That's how you know it's serious. When the man who's seen everything decides not to ask what's wrong. 1 hour later, 12 council members sat around the war table. Generals, advisors, the head of intelligence, the chief magistrate, the keeper of royal bloodline records. Caspian stood at the head of the table. He didn't sit. "Ashfall's breeding program is active," Caspian said. "No preamble. No diplomatic softening. I have a witness, an Omega, 19 years old, whip scars covering her back, an infant daughter carrying Voss bloodline markers, conceived through stolen genetic material used in forced breeding protocols." The room went silent. Not the polite silence of people absorbing information. The heavy silence of people who understand that what they've just heard will require them to do something dangerous. "Your Majesty," the chief magistrate began carefully, "these are serious allegations. If the Omega is... her name is Ren." The correction was quiet, final. The magistrate adjusted his approach. "If Ren is telling the truth, this constitutes an act of war under the Northern Compact. Genetic theft from a royal bloodline. Forced breeding of Omegas. Both are capital offenses." "I know what they are," Caspian said. "I wrote half of those laws." "Then you also know that we need evidence beyond a single witness. Hargrave will deny everything. He'll claim the Omega is lying. He'll claim the child was naturally conceived. Then we'll need more than testimony." Caspian turned to his intelligence chief, a woman named Sarah who had spent 15 years building a network of informants across every territory in the north. She was small, sharp-featured, and had a reputation for knowing things before they happened. "Sarah, how long to get confirmation?" "I've had assets in Ashfall for 3 years, Your Majesty. I can have documentation within 2 weeks. But extraction will be complicated. Hargrave runs a tight border. You have 2 weeks. Whatever you need. Whatever it costs." Sarah nodded once and left the room. She didn't need a second invitation. What about the girl? Eldrick asked. He was the only person in the room who could ask Caspian a question without formal address. A privilege earned through 40 years of service and the particular immunity that comes with being too old and too useful to offend. She stays in the East Wing, under my protection. The court will talk. The court always talks. Let them. They'll say you've taken an Omega, that you're replacing Elise. Caspian's jaw locked. The mention of Elise's name still had that effect. A visible tightening, like a cable being wound one turn too tight. I am protecting a woman and child who were subjected to crimes against every law I've sworn to uphold. That is what the court will say, because that is what is true. Eldrick studied Caspian's face. Something in the old man's eyes suggested he saw more than Caspian was showing. But he was wise enough not to say it. As you say, Your Majesty. Chapter 5, The Garden. A week passed. Wren healed. Her feet closed. Her weight climbed. The hollows in her cheeks filled slightly. Not enough, but slightly. Mira grew. Babies grow fast, and Mira grew faster than most. She was lifting her head, tracking objects, making sounds that were almost babbling. The physician said she was developing at the rate of a 6-month-old despite being only 4 months. Alpha blood. It accelerated everything. Wren stayed in the East Wing. She didn't venture out. The palace was too big, too full of people, too unpredictable. She'd been in captivity for 3 years. The habits of captivity don't dissolve in a week. She checked locks. She memorized exits. She calculated how long it would take to reach the gates if she needed to run again. On the 7th morning, Caspian knocked. There's a garden, he said. Behind the East Wing. Private. Walled. Nobody uses it. Would you and Mira like to see it? Wren hesitated. Outside meant exposed. Outside meant visible. Outside meant someone could see her and report her position, and she stopped the thought, forced it down. She was not in Greymire anymore. She was in Blackmoor. And the man standing in her doorway was not Hargrave. Okay, she said. The garden was beautiful. Walled in stone, sheltered from wind, overgrown in the way that gardens get when nobody tends them but the rain. Wildflowers grew between cracked flagstones. An apple tree leaned against the south wall, heavy with fruit that nobody picked. A stone bench sat beneath the tree, covered in moss. Wren stood in the entrance and breathed. Fresh air, sun on her face, the smell of living things that weren't afraid. Mira squirmed in her arms, reaching toward the light. Wren set her on a blanket on the grass. Mira immediately grabbed a fistful of clover and tried to eat it. Not food, Wren said, gently extracting the clover from tiny fingers. Mira grabbed another fistful. Tried again. Still not food. Mira looked up at her mother with an expression of profound disagreement. Wren laughed, came out rusty and surprised, like a door opening that hadn't been used in years. Caspian, standing near the garden wall, heard the laugh. He'd been looking at the apple tree, giving her space, pretending not to watch. But the laugh made him turn. Because it was the first time he'd heard Wren make a sound that wasn't pain, wasn't fear, wasn't the flat mechanical recitation of terrible things that had happened to her. It was just a laugh, and it hit him harder than he expected. She's eating the garden, Wren said, noticing him watching. She has good taste. Those are wild clover. The deer eat them too. She's not a deer. With that appetite, give her a few months. Wren almost smiled again. Almost. The muscles were remembering. They sat in the garden for 2 hours. Caspian told her about the apple tree. It had been Elise's. She'd planted it the first year of their marriage. After she died, nobody picked the fruit. It just grew and fell and grew again. That's wasteful, Wren said. Probably. You should pick them. Make something. Cider. Pies. Something. I don't know how to make pies. I do. Caspian looked at her. Wren looked away. She hadn't meant to say that. It had just come out. The way things come out when you're sitting in the sun and someone isn't hurting you and your guard drops for half a second. Then maybe you could teach me, Caspian said. This is the part one need you to understand. Caspian wasn't flirting. He wasn't performing. He was sitting in a dead woman's garden talking to a traumatized Omega about apple pies, and it was the most honest conversation he'd had in 2 years. Because Ren didn't treat him like a king. She treated him like a man. A man who didn't pick his apples and didn't know how to make pies and sat alone in rooms built for two. She saw him, and being seen by someone who had survived what Ren had survived meant something different than being seen by courtiers and advisors and diplomats. It meant she had looked at the worst the world had to offer and could still recognize the difference between a man who hurts and a man who doesn't. That's not romance. Not yet. That's just two damaged people sitting in sunlight, being careful with each other, learning that not every hand that reaches for you is reaching to harm. Chapter 6. The court learns. They couldn't keep it secret forever. The palace had eyes and every eye had a mouth. By the end of the second week, the court knew. A rogue Omega was living in the East Wing, the king's wing, with a baby, and the king was visiting her daily. The whispers spread like oil on water. He's replaced Elise. An Omega. A rogue Omega. It's disgraceful. The baby isn't his. It can't be. She's a spy from Ashfall. Has to be. Lady Margot Holt was the loudest voice. She was 43, the widow of a general who had died conveniently wealthy, and she had spent the last 2 years positioning herself as Caspian's most viable consort. The arrival of a teenage Omega with a baby was not part of her plan. Margot requested an audience with the king. She was granted 10 minutes. She used 3. Your Majesty, the court is concerned. An unvetted Omega in the royal wing. A child of unknown parentage. The optics are not your concern, Lady Holt. The stability of your throne is my concern. If the northern families believe you've taken a rogue as a mate, I haven't taken anyone. I've offered protection to a woman who was tortured, forcibly bred, and barely survived an escape that should have killed her. If the northern families have a problem with that, they can come discuss it with me personally. Margot's smile didn't waver. It was the kind of smile that never reached the eyes because the eyes were too busy calculating. Of course, Your Majesty. I merely suggest that perhaps the girl would be more comfortable in the servants' quarters. The East Wing sends a message, intentional or not. The message it sends is that she is under my protection. That message is intentional. Margot left. She was not satisfied. Satisfied was not in her emotional vocabulary. But she was patient. And patient people, in Ren's experience, were the most dangerous kind. Chapter 7, Mira's Secret. 17 days after Ren's arrival, Mira did something impossible. Ren was in the garden. Mira was on the blanket, surrounded by the wooden blocks that the carpenter had made for her at Caspian's request. The baby had been stacking them, which at 4 months old was unusual. Stacking blocks was a 6 to 8 month skill. Mira was doing it with a precision that made Ren uneasy. Then Mira knocked the stack over. It fell, and every block stopped in midair, hovering. 6 wooden blocks, suspended approximately 8 inches above the blanket, motionless. Mira giggled. Her eyes flashed gold. Not amber, gold. The pure, deep gold of an alpha bloodline so concentrated it burned. Ren's blood went cold. No, 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 she whispered, grabbing the blocks from the air and pressing them to the ground. They resisted. Mira's power held them. Then the baby's attention shifted to a butterfly, and the blocks dropped. Ren was shaking. Telekinetic ability. In a 4-month-old. This wasn't just alpha power. This was something else. Something that hadn't been seen in the Northern Territories for generations. The old texts called it the sovereign gift. The ability to manipulate physical matter through pure will. It was supposed to be myth. The kind of thing elders told stories about around fires, about ancient alpha kings who could move mountains and bend rivers. Mira reached for the butterfly and laughed. Ren's mind raced. If Hargrave knew about this, if anyone knew about this, Mira wouldn't just be valuable. She'd be the most sought-after child in the supernatural world. Every alpha house would want her, want to control her, want to breed from her, want to use her the way Hargrave had used Ren. Over my dead body, Ren thought, and she meant it literally. She picked up Mira, went inside, and locked the door. For the first time since arriving at Blackmoor, she considered running again. Then she heard a knock, gentle, patient, waiting for her to say, "Come in," before the door opened. Caspian. He saw her face. Read it instantly. The training of a man who had spent his life reading people. What happened? Ren's mouth opened, closed. She looked at Mira, at the door, at the window, calculating exits again. Old habits, survival habits. The habits of a woman who had learned that telling the truth got you whipped and keeping secrets kept you alive. But this secret was too big to carry alone. And the man standing in her doorway had not hurt her, had not taken Mira, had not lied, had not broken a single promise in 17 days. 17 days of consistent honesty, against 3 years of consistent brutality. The math was slowly shifting. "I need to show you something," Ren said. "And I need you to promise me, that what you see doesn't change what happens to us. That you won't take her." Caspian looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, at the way she was holding Mira like someone might rip the baby from her arms at any second. "I promise," he said, "whatever it is. She stays with you." Ren set Mira on the blanket. She placed 3 wooden blocks in front of the baby. Mira looked at them, looked up at Ren, looked at the blocks again. Then she raised her tiny hand. The blocks rose with it. Caspian stopped breathing. 3 blocks hovering in the air. A 4-month-old baby controlling them with a gesture. Her eyes blazing gold. The air in the room thickening with a power that pressed against Caspian's chest like a physical weight. "The sovereign gift," Caspian whispered. His voice was hoarse. "It's real. Now you understand why I ran," Ren said. "And why I can't stop running." Caspian stared at the floating blocks, at the baby, at Ren's face, tight with terror. The face of a mother who knows that her child's greatest strength is also her greatest danger. He crouched down, eye level with the baby. Mira turned her golden eyes on him and tilted her head, examining this large person who smelled interesting. She released the blocks. They dropped. Then she reached for Caspian's face. Her tiny hand pressed against his cheek. Her touch was warm. Her eyes were steady. Caspian closed his eyes. He felt it. The blood bond. The genetic connection. This was his line. His blood. His family's legacy. Concentrated in a baby born from theft and violence and survival. He opened his eyes and looked at Ren. "She's not running anymore," Caspian said. "Neither are you. I'm not going to protect you by hiding you. I'm going to protect you by making it impossible for anyone to touch you." "How?" Caspian stood. Something had shifted in him. The cracks in his walls weren't just cracks anymore. They were doors, and he was choosing to walk through them. By claiming her. Ren's eyes went wide. "Claiming, as my heir, publicly, before the full court. Under royal law, a claimed heir cannot be removed, challenged, or taken by any external power. She becomes untouchable. The court will refuse. She's an Omega's child, a rogue's child. They'll never accept. They'll accept what I tell them to accept. I am the king. And what about me? What happens to the rogue Omega who brought the heir?" Caspian looked at her. For a long moment he didn't speak. When he did, his voice was different, softer, the voice of a man, not a king. "What do you want to happen?" There it was again. That question. The question nobody had ever asked her in Greymire. The question that Caspian kept asking as if her answer actually mattered. I want to stay, Ren said. I want to stay with my daughter. I want to make pies from that apple tree. I want to stop checking the exits every time I hear a loud noise. I want to sleep through the night without dreaming about whips. Her voice cracked. I want to feel safe. I don't even know what that feels like anymore. Caspian took a step closer. Slowly, the way he always moved around her, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Then stay, he said. Not as a guest. Not as a refugee. Stay as Myra's mother. Stay as someone who belongs here. Because you do. Both of you. Ren looked at his face. Searched it for the lie. The trap. The hidden agenda. The thing that every alpha she'd ever known kept behind their kind words. Waiting to deploy once you trusted them enough to stop watching. She didn't find it. That doesn't mean it wasn't there. It means she chose, for the first time in 3 years, to believe that it wasn't. Okay, Ren said. Chapter 8. The Declaration. The full court assembled 3 days later. 200 wolves in the Great Hall. Nobles, generals, advisors, servants, pack members from every rank. Margot Holt stood in the front row, her smile perfectly arranged. Caspian entered carrying Mira. The hall went silent. Not quiet, silent. The Alpha King of the Northern Territories was carrying a baby. A baby nobody had been formally introduced to. A baby that smelled like something that made every wolf in the room tilt their head and narrow their eyes. Ren walked beside him. She wore a simple dress that Henna had found for her. Not royal clothing. Clean clothing. Her hair was washed and braided. Her feet were in soft boots. She looked like a different person from the starving girl who had collapsed at the gates 20 days ago. She looked like a woman with scars she no longer tried to hide and eyes that met the room without looking down. Caspian stepped onto the dais. He held Mira against his chest. The baby, because babies have absolutely no sense of political timing, grabbed his collar and tried to eat it. This child, Caspian said, his voice filling the hall without effort, carries the blood of the Voss line. She was conceived through crimes that I will not describe in this hall because the description would take longer than the punishment I intend to deliver. Margot's smile faltered, just slightly, like a picture hanging crooked. Her name is Mira. She is 4 months old. She is an alpha, and by the authority vested in me by the Northern Compact, by the laws of the Blackmoor throne, and by my own blood that runs in her veins, I claim her. He paused. Let the words land. She is my heir. The hall erupted. Margot's smile disappeared entirely. Nobles shouted. Advisors whispered. Guards tightened their grips on their spears. And then Mira, who had gotten bored with the collar, raised her hand toward the chandelier above the hall. The massive iron fixture, 40 candles, 200 pounds of metalwork, trembled. The chains creaked. The candles flickered. Every wolf in the room dropped to a crouch. Instinct. The instinct that fires when a power greater than yours makes itself known. Ren stepped forward quickly. Mira, no. She touched her daughter's hand. The chandelier steadied. The candles stopped flickering. Mira looked at her mother with an expression of mild offense, as if being told not to move a 200-pound iron fixture was an unreasonable restriction on her personal freedom. The hall was frozen. 200 wolves staring at a baby who had just moved a chandelier with her mind. Caspian held his daughter. His face was calm. His voice carried. Any questions? There were no questions. There were no objections. There was only the profound and slightly terrified silence of a kingdom realizing that its new heir could rearrange the furniture without touching it. Chapter 9. Hargrave's Response. Sarah's intelligence report arrived the next morning. 2 weeks, exactly as promised. 12 pages. Documentation of the Ashfall breeding program. Names, dates, genetic samples stolen from 7 alpha houses. 15 omegas currently held in the program. 3 children born and surviving. Mira was one of them. The documentation included testimonies from 2 former Ashfall enforcers who had defected. They confirmed everything Wren had said. The whippings, the forced confinement, the breeding protocols, the plan to raise alpha children as Hargrave's personal weapons. Caspian read the report alone. He set it down on his desk when he finished. He sat very still for approximately 4 minutes. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the northern horizon where, somewhere beyond the mountains, Declan Hargrave was sitting in his own palace, probably eating breakfast, probably comfortable, probably not aware that his entire world was about to collapse. Caspian summoned his general. The meeting lasted 30 minutes. He didn't declare war. War was loud, expensive, and killed people who didn't deserve to die. Instead, he did something worse. He invoked the Northern Compact's Article 7, Joint Enforcement Action, a legal mechanism that allowed the combined forces of 3 or more alpha houses to enter a sovereign territory for the purpose of ending crimes against the Compact. Within 2 weeks, 5 alpha houses had signed the action order. Not because they loved Caspian, because 3 of them had lost genetic material to Hargrave's program. Their bloodlines had been stolen, their legacies violated. This was personal for every one of them. Hargrave didn't stand a chance. He knew it. His allies knew it. When the combined forces arrived at the Ashfall border, Hargrave's own generals turned on him. They opened the gates. They stood aside. They let the enforcement team walk in because even men who had served a monster recognized when the monster's time was up. Hargrave was found in his study trying to burn documents. He was arrested, tried under compact law, and sentenced to life imprisonment in a facility so remote that the nearest town was 3 days' ride away. His territory was dissolved. The breeding program was dismantled. 15 Omegas were liberated. 3 children were reunited with their mothers. The news reached Blackmore on a Wednesday afternoon. Sarah delivered it personally. Wren was in the garden when Caspian told her. She was sitting on the stone bench with Mira on her lap. The baby was trying to make an apple float. She was getting better at it. The apple hovered about 3 inches before dropping into the grass. Mira looked personally insulted by gravity's persistence. "It's over," Caspian said. "Hargrave is in custody. The program is shut down. The Omegas are free." Wren didn't move for a long time. The apple lay in the grass. Mira reached for it. Wren stared at the garden wall, at the apple tree, at the sky above the stones. "Say it again," she whispered. "It's over." Wren's face crumbled. Not slowly. All at once. The mask she'd been wearing for 3 years, the flat voice, the mechanical recitations, the careful control, it all came apart. She bent forward, pressing her face against Myra's hair, and cried. Really cried. The kind of crying that comes from a place so deep it doesn't have a name. The kind that happens when a weight you've been carrying for so long it felt like part of your skeleton is suddenly, impossibly lifted. Caspian sat beside her. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just sat, close enough that she could feel his warmth, far enough that she had space, the way he always was, patient, present, letting her decide when and how and if. Mira, oblivious to the history happening above her head, picked up the apple and bit into it with 2 teeth that had come in last week. Juice ran down her chin. She seemed pleased. "She likes the apples," Wren said through her tears. "She has good taste," Caspian said. "You said that about the clover." "I stand by both statements." Wren laughed. A real laugh. Not rusty this time. Full. The sound of a woman whose muscles had finally remembered how. Epilogue. 6 months later. The garden had been tended. The apple tree was pruned. The wildflowers were organized into something that resembled deliberate planting, though Mira kept rearranging them telekinetically when she disagreed with the arrangement. The bench had been replaced with 2 chairs. 2. Because the king and the Omega sat there every evening now, watching their daughter practice floating increasingly large objects while the sun went down behind the palace walls. Wren had not become queen. She wasn't ready. might not be ready for years. Caspian hadn't asked, and Wren respected that he hadn't asked, because asking too soon would have been a kind of pressure, and pressure was the one thing Caspian had never applied to her. Not once. In 6 months. What they were was harder to name and more honest than any title. They were two people who had lost everything and found, in a garden with a dead woman's apple tree and a telekinetic baby, something worth protecting. Mira was 10 months old now. She could levitate objects up to approximately 5 pounds. She could stack blocks from across the room. She had once rearranged every book on Caspian's desk by color while he was trying to read them, and he had sat there watching it happen with an expression that was equal parts terror and pride. Wren had gained weight. 32 pounds. She slept through the night most nights. She still checked exits when she entered unfamiliar rooms, but she didn't check them in the garden anymore. The garden was safe. She knew this because 6 months of evidence had confirmed it. Not words. Evidence. Consistent, daily, boring evidence of a man who knocked before entering and asked what she wanted and didn't lie. Henna still visited every evening. Still brought opinions nobody asked for. You should eat more. The baby needs a warmer blanket. The king looks at you the way my husband looked at me, and we were married for 37 years, so I know what I'm seeing even if you two don't. Wren told Henna to mind her business. Henna told Wren that minding her business was not in her job description. One evening, as the sun dropped below the garden wall and Mira floated 3 apples in a wobbly circle above her head like a baby juggler, Wren turned to Caspian. You never asked me why I came to Blackmoor. Caspian looked at her. I assumed you were running from Hargrave. I was running to you. He waited. There's a story that Omegas tell each other. In Greymire. In the breeding rooms when the enforcers aren't listening. A story about a king in the north who changed the laws. Who made it illegal to harm Omegas. Who punished alphas who abused their power. A king who believed that protection meant something. She looked at the apple tree, at the garden, at the palace walls that had kept her safe for 6 months. I didn't know if the story was true. Most stories aren't. But I was dying, and Mira was dying, and I needed to believe that somewhere there was a king who actually meant it. She looked at him. You meant it. Caspian was quiet for a long time. The apples continued their wobbly orbit above Myra's head. The baby was concentrating hard, her tongue sticking out. My mother was an Omega, Caspian said. It was the first time he'd told Wren this. The first time he'd told anyone outside the royal family. My father mated beneath his rank. The court never forgave her for it. She spent her entire life being told she didn't belong in the palace she helped build. He looked at Wren. I changed the laws because of her. Because I watched a good woman be treated like she was less than what she was, for the crime of being born Omega. And I swore that if I ever had the power to change it, I would. Wren reached out. Slowly, carefully, the way she did everything. She placed her hand on top of his. Not gripping, just resting. The lightest possible contact. A touch that said I'm here and you can pull away and I won't be hurt by it. He didn't pull away. Mira lost concentration. The apples fell. One landed on Caspian's head. Ow, he said. She's practicing, Wren said. She's assaulting the king. She's your heir. She can do what she wants. Caspian rubbed his head. Looked at the apple. Looked at Mira, who was grinning with all 4 of her teeth. Fair point, he said. They sat in the garden until the stars came out. A king. An Omega. A baby who could move things with her mind. 3 people who had been alone and weren't anymore. The gates that Wren had collapsed in front of 6 months ago were still there. Iron. Heavy. Designed to keep the world out. But the garden behind the palace was something else entirely. Open. Warm. Growing. And every evening, when the sun went down, the king of the Northern Territories and the woman who had walked barefoot across a continent to find him sat in that garden and watched their daughter rearrange the world. One apple at a time. Dear listeners, Thank you so much for staying with me through this one. If Ren and Myra's story moved you, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow so I can bring you more stories like this. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Comment Sovereign if you made it to the end. And let me know in the comments, should Ren eventually become queen? Or is what she and Caspian have already enough? I think Myra's going to be trouble when she's a teenager. Those apples are just the beginning. See you in the next one.